Hello and welcome. I'm James Milan, and I'm here with Michael James Heffernan, who is the Republican candidate for state treasurer. Thanks for coming in to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me, James.
We're going to get right to reviewing the format for the interview. This will be a live-to-tape interview, and that means no edits once we begin. There was no pre-screening of questions, and the answers will be limited strictly to 2 minutes each. We will start with a 1-minute opening statement from the candidate, and after the questions, we will conclude with a 1-minute closing statement. So, Mr. Heffernan, you have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Great. James, thanks so much for having me. I am not a politician. I sit here in front of you as someone with 30 years in the private sector with direct experience in financial services and capital markets and working with investors, something that the treasurer does every day. But more importantly, I sit here as the grandson of a Boston policeman who earned his citizenship, as a matter of fact, this is his pin, in World War I, and raised a great family in Brighton. My other grandfather actually was a Democrat as well, and worked as the tree warden just around the corner in Cambridge. And I run because the problems that we have today are too big for the political establishment we have on Beacon Hill to solve it alone. I think that the private sector, where I come from, and the public sector need to lean in to solve these issues. And so I'm here as a candidate for an elected office, but I'm here really because I think of it as public service.
Thank you very much. We're going to get right into the questions, and I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but one last reminder that we will be strictly observing the 2-minute time limit. So the first question is, why are you running for state treasurer, and what prepares you to serve in this capacity? So
I'm running because I want to be able to give back to the community, and I actually won my first election in 1975 as student council president, I should say class president, and I've taken 30-odd years off to get some experience to bring back to the job. But in my job in capital markets, as I said in my opening statements, I've worked with professional investors and pension fund investors for over 30 years. I've actually helped launch 2 small companies, one here in Massachusetts, so I've helped create jobs. So I have a lot of direct experience. But there are some pressing issues here in Massachusetts. We have some of the highest debt ratios in the country on a per-person basis. We're the most leveraged state in the union. And at the same time, our pension system is both underfunded and structurally deficient. The Urban Institute did an exhaustive study on all of the pension systems in Massachusetts. Massachusetts was the only state to rank an F. So we have our jobs cut out for us. I want to help get local aid back to the communities. We have cut unrestricted local aid 40%. So you're actually paying more in taxes and getting less in services. And I think we need to turn that around here in the state, because your burden is not just your state tax rate. It's your property tax, it's all the other taxes and fees that go into it. So I look at this as a traditional Republican. I want more effective government and hopefully a smaller government.
Thank you very much. Do you believe the state treasurer has been an aggressive watchdog on behalf of taxpayers? I think you alluded to that already, and can you please give us specific examples to justify?
Well, I'll give you, we have over the past 10 years, just on our general obligation, the narrow definition of state debt, our debt service has almost doubled. And that's in a time when interest rates have come down. So for anyone who has refinanced their mortgage at home, you know how affordable the market is. So because we have one-party dominance on Beacon Hill, we're not having the type of conversations that we should have about our debt, about our pension system. I want to be able to deliver that local aid. You know, the treasurer does much more than manage the pension system and manage the debt. We want to be able to build more schools here. And I look at the inefficiencies and the excess debt in terms of how many schools could we build, how much aid could we drive to the local communities. And so I think the current treasurer has done some good things. We've got the checkbook online. They've done a good job of getting some of the abandoned property back. But I think we need to have a discussion about the discipline we need now, because we're a wealthy state, the discipline we need now so that we don't have to make sacrifices later. I have 3 kids in public schools, and they really love it here. And I want my kids to be able to live here, raise a family here, go to school here, but they need to be able to afford to stay in Massachusetts. And so I hope to bring that conversation to Beacon Hill in the fall, and hopefully in January.
Can you please give us 2 examples of how you think the state treasurer, in fact, could have done either more or better during the last 4 years?
Well, I think we haven't had scandals or problems coming out of the Treasurer's office, which I think is very admirable. But again, recently it happened the same week that the convictions came down in the probation scandal, where we passed a $1 billion bond bill to expand the convention center in Boston. And within that bill, the bill exempted the authority from much of the public oversight, public disclosure you needed for any of their financial activities. And at the same time, in their procurement, they weakened the Inspector General's ability to approve their alternative procurement. So we're lowering the bar in transparency. As Treasurer, you have hard and soft power. Soft power is bringing those arguments about debt and about pension. Hard power is actually just saying no. That bill, as Treasurer, that bill I would not issue. I would not issue the bonds attached to that bill. What needs to be done in South Boston is another discussion, but the fact that we're lowering the bar on transparency and accountability the same week that we had convictions in the probation scandal shows me that we're just not having those discussions on Beacon Hill. We're not holding our elected officials accountable.
Thanks. What specific proposals would you seek to implement to help the state economy, to create jobs, and to attract business to the Commonwealth?
So we have the Small Business Banking Partnership, which the current Treasurer has started. It's a great program, but we've only put about $350 million into the local banks, and there are fees and collateral attached. I'd like to make that program much larger. And at the same time, we want to take assets of the state and put them to work inside Massachusetts, so it doesn't cost the taxpayers any more money, but we can help drive businesses to grow here in Massachusetts, create jobs. We're 45th in job creation. We've only created net 15,000 jobs in 15 years. In the 90s, we created 500,000 jobs. So let's try to drive more of the resources of the state without having to increase taxes or increase the debt burden, so that we can create those jobs, which in their own become a virtuous circle of creating more income tax, creating more sales tax. And sales tax is what drives the MSBA, and we'll be able to build more schools. And at the same time, I would like to be able to take some of those assets. Our homeless numbers are going up, not down. And I think that we need to be judged, Republicans or Democrats, the leadership in the state, how well we take care of our least fortunate and our most at risk. And if there's a way that we can find to take some of these assets, whether it's in that small business banking or other assets within the Treasury and the state, to be able to take the 2,000 families, up from 1,800 last year, that are living in motels and hotels, bring them back into their communities, because it is all about families. So those are two of the proposals that are really at the top of my list.
Thank you. And I know you've already alluded to this, but are you satisfied with the present state pension system? And if elected, would you pursue pension reform? And if so, can you give us a couple of specific examples of the reforms you'd pursue?
James, thank you. So as I said, I've had 30 years of experience working in the investment field, working with investors, so it's something that I know very well. The state's performance, right? You have to break it down into three. There's three levers that you can pull as Treasurer. One is performance. Our performance numbers put up by Prim have actually been quite good. As a matter of fact, last year, just back of the envelope, if we had been fully funded, we would have made an additional $4 billion in the pension fund. So being underfunded, not paying our bills, is much more expensive than I think the voters and taxpayers realize. So again, what would I do? One is to make people aware that the underfunding, right? We've got a $36 billion budget. We have exceeded our estimates on income tax revenues for the past 3 years. Why isn't more of that money going into the pension system? Every dollar I put into the pension system, getting it underfunded, it saves you $3 in the future. It's the best investment we can make. So one is to talk about it, make it public, to get more money from the legislature. And two, and the professionals at Prim are working on this, bringing down your fees and expenses. They look like small numbers, but they're annual, and they add up and they really cut into performance. And third is actually to help pursue reform. But we need to remember that we have made a guarantee to our retirees and to our state employees. It needs to be fair to everybody. We're a wealthy state. We can afford to pay these benefits. We can afford to not be underfunded. We're 60% funded. The average in the country is 74. We can make those payments. It's personal. My father is a retired public school teacher, guidance counselor from Wayland, and he's on a pension. And so it's personal that we keep our promises, but at the same time, we have to make sure that the legislature is disciplined in how we fund it and disciplined on how we structure it.
Thank you very much. Can you please explain how the current distribution of lottery funds work, and if elected, whether you would pursue changes to that system, and again, if you can give us specific examples.
So the lottery, I think one of the issues that pops up now in the paper is, why doesn't the lottery go back, to the towns where the money is actually spent? And it actually is it's a function of property tax. And if you go back in history in 1969, 70, 71, they brought it in. There was a reason why it was set up that way. One of the reasons why it's so topical, and yes, we should revisit how we deliver not just lottery, how we deliver local aid. We've cut local aid, as I said earlier, 40% since 2009. The only source that communities get for local aid now is essentially the lottery. So it's not only the formula for lottery, it's the formula for how we deliver local aid. So yes, we should look at lottery, but what we really need is to address the larger issue of getting local aid. And even on education, we've barely kept up with inflation on what we've brought back. That local aid issue is a big one. And I think that, as I said earlier, it's causing property taxes to go up, and it's really hurting the pocketbook of the average family here in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Would like to know if you could please give us one example of an issue that you and your opponents on the other side of the primary, obviously your opponents, agree on, and then two examples of issues on which you differ, and why your own positions would represent the best interests of the Commonwealth.
So I think we all agree on really beefing up financial literacy. And for me, we break it down into 5 groups, and it's the people that need it the most: students, the poor, and people coming out of transition, people who are in our criminal justice system that are coming back out, and then the elderly, and I think especially is the veterans returning, coming out of the military, coming out of service. And I think we can really do a great job by we have some of the brightest people in the investment and in the financial services industry right here in Boston. So Massachusetts first. Let's make sure that we're using all of those resources. Instead of starting new and different programs, let's get a comprehensive program that uses the resources that we have here in Massachusetts. So I think we all agree on that. We probably have a little different approach. My opponents are all voting to repeal the casino law. I'm not a big gambler. I think the last time I was in Las Vegas, I gambled $7 and walked away with 10. But I look at it as economic development. We've got $1 billion going into some of the most at-risk and poorest and highest unemployment areas of the state. Springfield, Everett, or whether it's going to be Revere, and then down on the South Coast. And so it's not really how I vote on it. I look at it as economic development. We owe New Bedford and Fall River a $1 billion plan. We'll owe Springfield a $1 billion plan. We'll owe Everett or Revere a $1 billion plan. It's going to bring needed jobs, needed boost, and those areas have been hurting for a very, very long time. And so I really want to bring that back. And I think I'm not for raising taxes, and I think each of my opponents are for raising taxes. With a $36 billion budget, Massachusetts is rich. We would be one of the 55th.
Sorry,
yep,
we've
gotcha.
got to move on. Thanks. So, what makes you the best candidate?
I'll give you 2 reasons. One, I don't look at this as politics. I will do what's right for the people of Massachusetts. And I come from 30 years in the private sector. I'm not looking for the next job. I don't want to be governor. This isn't a promotion to a statewide office for me. All of my opponents have run for other offices. They are essentially career politicians. And I think my view, which is that government should be effective and smaller, and that we should have more individual liberty is the correct approach. To grow jobs in Massachusetts, to create opportunity, which is the job of government, requires the government do what's necessary, not everything. If we can reduce regulation, as they did in the 90s, by a third, if we can, assure businesses coming in that their taxes aren't going to go up, we can create jobs and opportunity here. And that's what I want to do. And I think bringing 30 years of experience working in large organizations, when I worked in capital markets, I worked for a company in 107 countries and 330,000 employees. It's an 87,000 employees here in Massachusetts. So I have the executive experience to work not just in Treasury, but across with the legislature and across the executive branch to be effective, to drive change, to make the state more livable, to create more jobs, to create more schools, build more schools, and get more aid back to our communities, so that Massachusetts, which is the most educated state in the union, 40% of our adults have a college education or better, but it also becomes the best state for opportunity and jobs.
Thanks very much, and that actually brings us to our last question. And although I know you've said that your experience has been in the private sector, I would ask nonetheless, what strategies would you use for working with members of other parties or with others of opposing views? And what experience have you had implementing these kinds of strategies? So
the private sector, in some ways, the public sector is easier because it's, in this state, it's primarily Republicans and Democrats. But when you work in a large organization or when you service other businesses, everybody has their own plan, their own goal, and you learn to work with, with those agendas, work with those goals. So people talk about what would you do day one. What I would do as soon as I was elected is to reach out to the leadership, right? The Republicans are a minority in this state. As a matter of fact, the Democrats are only 33% of the voters. It's mostly an independent state. But you reach across to the other parts of the leadership. What are your goals? How do you want to get there? How can we work together? That's what happens in the private sector. That's what happens in large firms and small firms. It's what I've done in my whole life and been very successful at it. And so it's not us versus them. It's what can we do. What shared goals do we have? Everybody wants to create jobs in Massachusetts. Everybody wants to help to make sure that the education that you get in Weston or Wellesley is as good as the education you get in Springfield or Holyoke or New Bedford or Fall River or Picketown or Lawrence. And I think there are a lot of goals we share, and we have a rich history of Republicans, back to John Volpe and especially with Bill Weld, of working together to making Massachusetts not only great again, but making Massachusetts a leader again.
Thanks very much, and that actually concludes this part of the interview. You are now invited to make a 1-minute closing statement.
James, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to meeting many of you on the campaign trail. Again, I'm not a politician. I'm coming with 30 years of private sector experience so that we can make Massachusetts great again, a leader again. Our job is to drive local aid to the communities, more local aid to the communities, so that we can have more opportunity and more education for us and our children. So join me in making Massachusetts one of the, not only the most educated state, not only one of the best places to live. Let's make it affordable, and let's make it affordable for everyone in all 351 communities. And thanks again for having me.
And we want to thank Mr. Heffernan for participating in our conversation today. Please make your voice count by voting at the state primary on September 9th. For Arlington Public News, this is James Milan. Thanks for joining us.